Did you know? The hardware of the Sega Genesis, or Mega Drive outside of North America, was based on a modified version of Sega's System 16 arcade boards. Arcade cabinets that used the System 16 hardware included Altered Beast, Shinobi, Golden Axe, and Alex Kidd The Lost Stars. Because of the similar hardware, Sega was able to launch the Genesis with a collection of recognizable games that looked and sounded very similar to their arcade counterparts. However, these ports were slightly scaled down. Even though both systems used the same CPU, the arcade boards were clocked at 10 MHz, while the Genesis ran at a slower 7.61 MHz. The idea of having popular arcade kits at home helped move Genesis systems at first, but Sega soon found that what works in the arcade doesn't necessarily work in the living room. Gamers in the gaming press complained that early Sega Genesis games were too short and repetitive. This in part prompted the creation of Sega's killer app, Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic was also the answer to Sega being able to contend with Mario, but this was just another example in a long line of competitive moves between Sega and Nintendo. Nintendo had the Famicom modem and the Super Famicom Satellaview add-on, so Sega tried their hand at a series of similar devices. One of these devices was the Mega Modem in Japan. It was a device that allowed users to check the news, weather, banking data, and even let them use an optional printer. Sega also released a Sega Network cartridge. This gave users access to the Sega Games Library, a subscription service that allowed owners to download and play games from a menu. Nearly half a dozen titles were available at launch, with more promised in the future. However, due to lackluster sales, the network was taken offline a year later. In Japan, 16 Mega Drive games made use of the Mega Modem for online play, although there was considerable lag and it was fairly expensive. Sega of America planned to release the Mega Modem in North America under the name the Telegenesis Modem, but these plans were canceled without announcement. A download subscription service eventually made its way to North America late in the Genesis lifecycle with a device called the Sega Channel. For $12.95 a month, users could play downloadable games and demos, as well as check the news and read gaming tips. Some games were released for the service before they were sold in stores, and a few import titles were placed on the service that were never released in North America, including Mega Man The Wily Wars and Game Freak's Pulse Man. A few years into the Super Nintendo's reign, Nintendo came out with the Super FX chip. This enabled the Super Nintendo to render more advanced 2D and 3D effects. Sega responded to the Super FX chip with their own SVP, or Sega Virtual Play chip. The one Genesis title that used the SVP chip, Virtua Racer, retailed at nearly $100, making it the most expensive Genesis cartridge to ever be sold in stores. Ironically, the price of additional chips was the primary reason Sega publicly criticized Nintendo in a 1994 issue of Game Fan magazine. Nintendo would like you to believe that by adding chips into their cartridges, they will be saving you money. If Donkey Kong Country, priced at $69.99, is any indication of the money they are saving you, it's a good thing that they are a game company and not your banker. There were plans for at least 2 more games to use the SVP chip, Virtua Fighter and Daytona USA, but they never materialized in regular cartridge form. The SVP chip didn't turn out to be a good investment, so Sega focused their efforts on the 32X add-on instead. Arguably, the most memorable competition between Nintendo and Sega was in marketing.
The Sega Genesis has blast processing. Super Nintendo doesn't.
Contrary to popular belief, the widely used Genesis marketing buzzword, blast processing, wasn't just a nonsense term made up for the casual audience. The word was based on a trick that programmers discovered that temporarily increased the graphical capabilities of the Genesis. In an interview with Retro Gamer, former Sega of America technical director Scott Bayless stated, "There were all kinds of subtleties to the timing and the trick didn't work reliably on all iterations of the hardware, but you could do it and it was cool as heck." So during the run-up to the Western launch of the Mega CD, the PR guys interviewed me about what made the platform interesting from a technical standpoint. And somewhere in there, I mentioned the fact that you could blast data to the digital to analog converters. They loved the word blast, and the next thing I knew, blast processing was born. The term was used in promotions as a short way of boasting the superior processing speed of the Genesis. However, this was just a convenient side detail, as the Super Nintendo outperforms the Genesis in almost every other category. Despite technical inferiority, Sega was able to grow from less than 8% of the North American market prior to the launch of the Genesis to 55% in 1994. This was achieved through a series of savvy and calculated marketing decisions. Nintendo's strategy was to hook gamers while they are children with a steady stream of quality, family-friendly games. Sega saw this as a chance to cater directly to older gamers and teenagers. Sega of America coordinated with a market research firm where they studied the daily lives of around 100 teenagers. They spent months analyzing every aspect of their lives, filming what they said and observing the teens with their friends. The result of this research was a brash and aggressive advertising campaign featuring catchy slogans like "Genesis does what Nintendo don't" and the famous Sega scream. Sega! This confrontational style of advertisement became the subject of a culture clash between Sega of Japan and Sega of America. Japanese culture tends to favor more subtle advertisement, and it's been reported that the board members of Sega of Japan hated the North American strategy. But Sega president HAYAO Nakayama trusted the North American branch, and he gave them permission to do what they felt was right. The results of Sega's marketing not only helped spearhead the Genesis to serious competition for Nintendo in North America, but they also opened the doors for later consoles like the Sony PlayStation to occupy the same market space. In fact, prior to the release of the PlayStation, a Sony-conducted focus group test found that teenage boys were reluctant to admit whether or not they owned a Super Nintendo. Sega's aim at an older audience in North America made an enormous impact on gaming. In the mid-90s, a series of court hearings in the United States were held after parents and politicians discovered children were potentially exposed to violence and sexual themes. The Genesis port of Mortal Kombat and the Sega CD game Night Trap were at the center of these hearings. The lawsuits prompted Sega of America to create their own rating system to help guide parents and children on the content within their games. Sega introduced the Video Game Ratings Council in 1993, which categorized games with 3 different ratings. Sega's Video Game Ratings Council was replaced by the industry standard ESRB, or Entertainment Software Ratings Board, after the hearings in April 1994. The reaction to Sega of America's attempt at broadening the demographics of video game consumers reverberated all over the world in the decades that followed. Other regulatory agencies were formed and followed the mold set by the ESRB, including PEGI, Pan-European Game Information, and Japan's CERO, the Computer Entertainment Ratings Organization. These ratings boards command a lot of power over the content within video games today, meaning the Genesis really lived up to its namesake as a new beginning in gaming. That's all for today, but don't forget to subscribe to DidYouKnowGaming and follow DidYouKnowGaming on Facebook and Twitter. Make sure you also check out DidYouKnowGaming.com, and if you like this video, check out some more videos. And if you like the sound of my voice for some reason, you can check out my channel where I just released a video on the top 10 Sega Genesis games. Some which might surprise you, or piss you off, I don't know. You tell me. I love you. A lot.